Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
I'm not hearing anything. Hello? Am I on? Yeah, I didn't hear the intro. Well, that was a... Hello, I'm back. It always happens if you've been gone. Somebody messes with the equipment and things aren't quite right. Hi. It's good to be back, I think. It was my intention in my absence to, get myself in a better place. And I was, I think, mostly successful. And I do, thanks, there. I hear the dulcet sounds of my own voice. I have a feeling that, as happened last time when I took a month off, it won't last, this calmer place I have found. And I hate to sound like a proselytizer, but I'm probably going to a bit. I really think it's exceedingly important that we all take care of ourselves in these trying times. We're good for nothing, for fighting back, for resisting, for action, whatever, if we are exhausted or crazed with anger. When you're angry, when you're stressed, none of the systems in your body are working right. None of them. You don't make good decisions. You're incapable of thoughtfulness. And that's because if you're stressed, the sort of more primitive parts of your brain take over. It's the fight, flight, this, that. You're just trying to stay alive. And then the parts of your brain that are distinctly human, capable of reason and thought, they get shoved to the side. And I think what happens to a lot of us in these times is exactly that. We become not our best selves, not our most capable selves. And given the fact that I think by and large we're a rather serious bunch, that doesn't mean we don't love to laugh, but we take being a citizen seriously. We pay attention. We read. We care. I really think we got to remember that the number one thing we have to do is care for ourselves, because if we're no good, then we can't do any good. That's all. And that's sort of what I came to again realize when I went away to try to get my bearings again. I was reminded of a number of things. I went to a place that is a place for exactly rehabilitation, rejuvenation, redirection. And so I went to a lot of lectures about health and brain health and memory, nutrition, that kind of stuff, just trying to get myself caring for myself again. And one of the things that was driven home, no matter what lecture I went to, whether it was on, stomach health or brain health, it was always the same. Stress is a killer. Now, It's impossible to be alive and not encounter stress. Life is stressful. But we live in particularly stressful times for us. And we can, talk about that till we're blue in the face. But one of the things that I know, I think, is that and I've said this before, am not going to let Donald Trump kill me through stress. Stress kills. The more stress you feel, the more chemicals are being released in your body. These are chemicals meant to save your life in times of, great danger, like if a lion is about to pounce on you. And all of those kinds of chemicals let loose in your body, while they can save you in the short term, they can also do a hell of a job on you in the long term, which is why, again, you need to learn. I keep saying I'm talking to myself, how to handle stress, how to relieve it, how to ameliorate it, how to avoid situations which you know to be stressful. So anyway, I actually, as I did last time I left you for a while, I thought mightily about whether or not to continue doing this show. Because it requires me to stay on top of the news. And the news is stressful. And I think the question will continue to plague me. But where I came down this time was that even if I were to not do the show, I am a person who keeps up. So while I might not read quite as much, I would still be ingesting the kind of stressful information that we all tend to do. And so stopping the show would really not help in that regard. It would merely take from me 5 hours a week in which I actually can maybe vent a little bit of the stress and or do something that might be or I might feel is helpful in combating the forces that have taken control of our government. Anyway, I decided to hang in there for a while, but I want you to know that I have come to some, and I really hope I stick to it. I don't want to be jerked around anymore by what is called the news cycle. It's impossible to be, again, a thoughtful person if one is simply like a pinball being, knocked here and then knocked over there and then knocked up here and just reacting. I don't want to anymore. So I am not going to come in here day after day and talk about what happened the day before, necessarily. Not necessarily. Because it gets us nowhere, and in fact, it gets us in Trump's thrall. It allows him to control what it is we're thinking about. With his tweets, with his absurd remarks, with his despicable, near treason-ish conduct, all of that. I really am trying to exorcise this man as much as I can from my life, while at the same time working diligently to get him out of the White House. And the same goes with any of his enablers. That would be anybody with a Republican on a Republican ticket. So I am going to try to be less like MSNBC, CNN, Fox, all the others, the talk shows, immediately responding to his latest spasm, his latest brain fart, his whatever. I'm sick of it. It's not a good use of my time. It's not a good use of your time. And so, again, I will very much limit how much I will watch cable news. They are, again, not good for our mental health and our physical health, since it's all one of a piece. And I don't think they educate us, these shows, very much. I think they do what I'm going to attempt not to do, is they respond in real time to every utterance and emanation from that grotesque human being who somehow became the President of the United States. I don't want to do that, and I'm not going to. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be talking about him or the consequences of his actions. I'm just not going to do it like cable news does it. It's allowing him to conduct the symphony. It's allowing him to create the narrative. It's allowing him way too much control over our own ability to figure out what's important and where our attention should be at any given moment. So I don't know what that means in terms of the show, because I still will be poring over newspapers looking for stuff. But I have to tell you, I just am trying mightily for my own health to not react, to not jump when he wants me to jump, to not get freaked out when he wants me to get freaked out. I want dominion as much as possible over my own self. Again, I will feel better as a result. So, in my absence, all kinds of stuff happened, the Helsinki stuff and all that, and it will continue to happen. Today, this morning, his tweet, right, about, threatening nuclear holocaust, essentially, on Iran. This will be difficult to resist, to withstand, but I aim to try. That's all I can say. I noticed I used the word resist, and I also want to say something else that popped into my head the other day. The so-called resistance that we all said we were a part of. We will resist him. I decided I don't like the idea of the resistance, because to resist is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of that as a defensive posture. I'm like this when I'm resisting. I'm pushing back. I think we don't need to be in a defensive crouch. I don't like being in one, and I don't want to be in one. I think we need to go on offense. And so I just don't think that heading of resistance is right. I understand it, and I find myself using it all the time. I will resist this, I will resist that. But overall, it seems to me that people on our side are forever playing defense. It is the other side that is always playing offense. Right? Always playing offense. Even when any one of us would say, okay, well, the way things are going now, you're definitely on defense. No, they don't go on defense. They, as we say in the media, double down. What doubling down is refusing to play defense and instead playing more offense. Right? It's not our nature. They are more by nature aggressive. And I don't know if we're capable of playing offense rather than defense, but I think we've got to get better at it. We got to really work at it. We have to really try. Because they are just, and I mean this in every way that you can take it, they are shamelessly offensive. Right? Yeah. So one of the things, can I just tell, I'm not going to jump right in today. I'm going to tell you some of the stuff that I did on my little sojourn away. Because these are like, again, it's learning how to take care of yourself. I read a ton. I have a stack of books like that high that I read. So much more enjoyable than reading newspapers. So much more. And why don't men read novels? I mean, it seems like generally speaking, men don't read novels. And if they do read novels, it's like Tom Clancy or, it's or maybe a historical novel. Okay, but I love historical novels too. But I mean novels that just delve into a life or the lives of people. Why? It's rare for me to find a man who wants to read those books. But that's what I read. I read that for escape, because a really well-written novel totally pulls you into another world. I mean, so much so that you care about people, that you cry, that you laugh, that your heart pounds if there's danger, that you feel genuine relief if the danger is avoided. And that's getting out of oneself, right? Which can be very pleasant. And I spent a lot of time disappearing into other people's lives, other times in history, and other cultures. And in doing that, I found some, the word that's in my head is surcease. That's a word I learned from, having to read Shakespeare. It's not a word I've ever used before, but that's the word that popped into my head. And I think it means an amelioration. There's some line from some monologue, surcease of sorrow? Whatever. God, see on my head. My head. Anyway, I want to tell you just a little bit, and forgive me if this isn't your cup of tea, of 3 of the books I read, all of which I loved. Some of which I had a harder time getting into or loving, but all of which I found it impossible to put down. And again, guys, these are books that take you into the lives of other human beings, into their relationships, into what makes them tick. It's something that women really love, and you guys don't, and I think you should. I don't get it. It is, I think, a very gender-specific difference, which is not to say that guys don't read novels. I mean, some guys do, but they're in the minority. So one of the books, I think the first book I read was called Golden Hill. And it was a historical novel in that it was set in 1740s of New York. And because it was set in 1740 New York, prior to the Revolution, it was fascinating historically. And what novelists do, if they're really good novelists, is they make sure they're not making historical errors, so that the costuming is right, the language is right, the picture they paint of the city is correct. I mean, at that point, New York was a city of about 6,000 people, 7,000 people. And it was under, of course, as the entire country was, under British control. And so it was, I mean, that alone was fascinating stuff. But it was a wonderful read, a fun story, fascinating. Another takeaway from it is, guess what was in New York City in 1740? Slaves. And they figure in the book. Slaves. Again, Americans forget that slavery in this country was all over the country. Earlier in the history, it was everywhere. So slaves were being bought and sold in New York City. You forget. And one of the things I sort of would long for is to be reminded of what it's like to live, as most human beings who have ever lived have lived, which is without the constant cacophony of telephones and computers and televisions and just constant input. That if you needed to communicate with somebody and that person was in London, well, yeah, you wrote a letter and you sent it, but between the time you sent that letter and got a response, 6 months might pass, 4 months might pass. And so when you're living with that kind of time, relationships are a bit different. How you think is a bit different. The stresses that you feel are different, but not knowing that it could be any different, there is an acceptance of that's reality. I mean, we don't even have to go back that far. I can go back to when I went off to college. I mean, my parents did not expect to hear from me except maybe once a week. We got into the habit of on Sunday, I would call them. And we wouldn't talk for long because long distance was expensive. And then you'd hang up. Back when I was in college, my brother was in Europe much of the time, and we would write letters to each other, which took a long, long time to get to him and a long time back for me to get. So you don't have to go back to 1740 to remember a different way of being alive. And guess what? It worked. I think in some ways it worked a lot better. Another book I read was Pachinko, Pachinko, set in Japan from about 1910 to near present day. And it was a family saga kind of a thing, but also fascinating in that I learned quite a bit about Japanese society, but also about Korean society, because the book follows a Korean family living in Japan, which is a subservient population there. The Japanese looked down on Koreans. Koreans didn't get jobs. Koreans wouldn't lived in, not very pleasant communities. And Japan had taken over Korea. So the Koreans were colonized by Japan. And boy, you find out, in terms of the histories of when we think, South Korea, Japan, I learned a lot from that one as well. Also, cultures in which honor figures prominently, and family honor figures prominently, which is something that in our culture, frankly, has very little standing. And another novel with the unfortunate title of Old Filth, which also was fascinating. And I learned about what were called Raj orphans when Britain was a colonial power. And Brits were sent all over their empire to control the populations. India, Malaysia, Africa, they were everywhere, right? The great British Empire. And often the children of these Brits, when they reached the age of about 4 or 5, were shipped back to Great Britain to be educated. And they became known as Raj, R-A-J, as in India, Raj orphans. And boy, talk about family separation. And these are families, and the Brits are just famous for this, right? I mean, the upper crust Brits always sending their children off to these God-forsaken, sadistic boarding schools, and rarely seeing their own children. This is a thing that runs through British history. And it does a job on the children, who then grow up to be British adults, who then go on to do the same kind of things to their children. Really something. Anyway, I found that interesting too. One of the things I did one evening was watch a documentary, and I want to share some information I got with that, because this was about a man who fought fascism. And we talk often on this program about fighting what we see as incipient fascism and nationalism. And so to be reminded of the life of someone who lived it, was confronted with not incipient, but the real deal. It was exceedingly powerful stuff, and I couldn't get it out of my head, still have not. One of the things that made it more powerful was the documentary was about a man who, now deceased, but lived up until relatively recently, maybe 8 years ago, and died at the age of 90. But his wife, his widow, who was much younger than he, introduced the documentary and then took questions after. So there was a sense of intimacy in some respects with the subject of this documentary. His name was Jan Wiener, or Jan Wiener. He was a boy in Germany when his father and mother ran from the Nazis and ran to, unfortunately, Prague, Czechoslovakia. So he was 17 years old, and living in Prague with his mother, who was divorced from his father. His father had remarried, and they were Jews, and had remarried a non-Jew. And the Nazis start closing in again on Prague, and his father and his stepmother and he end up in some inn somewhere. And his father, over dinner, says to his son, 17 years old, "They are coming, the Nazis. I cannot run anymore. But you are young. You must run. You must survive. I am going to kill myself tonight." Imagine having that conversation. I am going to kill myself tonight. I have poison. And this boy watches. The documentary has him return to all of these places. So you see the old man that was the boy, sitting in the room where his father lay on a bed next to his wife. And they took the poison. The wife died very quickly. The son watched as his father died. And the old man, now reliving it, says, "I never forgave myself for what I was thinking watching him die. I was so enraged. How dare he? How dare he abandon me? I was 17 years old. I'm looking at him. He's checking out. He wanted to die at his own hand rather than at the hands of the Nazis. But I now am alone." And what he wouldn't forgive himself for was thinking, die already. He felt he had to stay until his father was dead. And he's thinking, every second I'm sitting here, the Nazis are getting closer. Die then. We cannot imagine what people living then, what choices they had to make or felt they had to make, what positions they put themselves in, their children in, whether it was courage, whether it was brilliance. Later in the documentary, a friend of his says to him, I think your father was courageous. He knew that the two of you, that he would hold you back. He thought you had a better shot by yourself. Anyway, the rest of the story is mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing. Obviously, he survived. He spent a lot of time in prisons, but not concentration camps. He was imprisoned by the Italians. He escaped finally an Italian POW camp. Made his way somehow to the UK and volunteered for the Royal Air Force. He was now all of what, 21? 20. And the RAF took him in and trained him, and he was able, which is what he had wanted to do, to fight. After the war, he was, and others from Czechoslovakia who had managed to get out and also went to fight with the Brits, were greeted as heroes when they returned to Czechoslovakia. He returned and found his family home occupied by what used to be his neighbor. And he said to the neighbor, I am back. I want my home back. And the neighbor said, it's mine now. It's mine. You guys abandoned it. I took it. He saw that all the family furniture was in there. He said, that's all mine, not yours. And the former neighbor, who was now a low-level functionary in the local communist government now, said to him, it's mine, and there's nothing you can do, which turned out to be true. So where he was greeted as a hero, he was homeless. And he was later imprisoned for years and tortured by his countrymen, who he'd helped save from the Nazis. Tortured because they said to him, you fought with the British. And since now they were commies, they decided that he was a British spy, which he was not. This life, this unbelievably tortured existence in which he lost so much. His mother killed at Theresienstadt. His father, of course, suicide. All his family, his greater family, all destroyed by the Nazis. He ended up in the United States. He was a professor at NYU. But talking to his widow, again, you're reminded of the horror that can come when nations lose their way and turn to scapegoating and turn to propaganda and turn to autocracy. he was from a very sophisticated family in one of the more sophisticated parts of the world. That didn't change a thing. They all essentially became animals. Prey and predator. One or the other. Sometimes both roles get played. So I guess that documentary reminded me that the veneer of our daily lives is just that. Human beings are human beings. There was no difference between the human beings in Germany in the 30s and the human beings in America in the 2000s. There is no difference. We are human beings with the same potential for good and, unfortunately, the same potential for evil. So I guess we have to have the courage to face things, to see things. But again, I will argue we have to take care of ourselves because you can't fight if you've become a gibbering lunatic, right? And you can't fight if you are in a constant state of rage because you're fighting stupid then. I just, I don't know, some of what I thought when I was gone. By the way, one day I was sitting near a swimming pool at this place, and I was reading my book, and I turned at one point, looked up from my book, and I turned, and seated about, I'd say about 8 feet from me was Ted Koppel. And let me tell you, Ted, he was in a bathing suit. Ted, for an old fart, I mean, he's 78 years old. He has a good bod. He's like so many people on TV that when you see them, you're sort of shocked by how small they are. I also was behind him in line at the omelet station one day, and I was towering over him. I thought, geez, Ted. And I didn't remember that. I interviewed him once at WTAE, and I guess I know he was shorter than me, but I think he shrunk. I've shrunk too. He looked good, though. He looked good, but I was thinking, aha! I'm not the only one who's up to here with all of this who needed to get away. I didn't bother him. You don't get away to have people saying, oh, Mr. Koppel. So I didn't. Although it's funny because the day before I had read something about him, which is how I knew he was 78. And it was a little item about this Sacha Baron Cohen latest shtick, and how Koppel's one of the people he tried to, hoodwink. And the article had said that he had been invited to Koppel's home, not as Sacha Baron Cohen, obviously, but as some alter ego that Baron was, using. And it had said that Koppel had thrown him out. And it was odd. So I had read that. I think it was like that morning or something. And then bang, oh, there he was. It was a little odd. But he He looked good, and I got to tell you, he was not getting away like he should have, because he had his nose in the New York Times and on his iPad. He was, he has to, I guess, sucking it all in. Hey, one of the stories that I saw that fascinated me was about Scarlett Johansson deciding, okay, I guess I won't make that movie, and the movie being about Dante Tex Gill. Do you know about Dante Tex Gill? You should, because Dante Tex Gill was a Pittsburgher, and now they're making a movie about him. Back in the day, we would have insisted that Dante Tex Gill was a her, because she was biologically female, but never identified as such. And shortly after I came to Pittsburgh, I remember reading about him. It's going to take me a while to get used to that. I've always thought of Dante as her. But in our more informed time, we know that Dante, who presented as a man, would want to be called him and he. So I will do that. But Dante Tex Gill ran, I think, most of the brothels in Pittsburgh. Always dressed very nattily in suits and ties. Was a big guy. But so the fact that they're making, obviously if they wanted Scarlett Johansson to play him, and the reason, of course, she's not, is because the transsexual community and their supporters got hot and bothered and said a transsexual should play Tex. I mean, assuming a transsexual actor should play Tex. Whatever. I will be fascinated in seeing it, because one of my dearest friends lives in one of Tex's former brothels. And so I have spent a lot of good times in Dante Tex Gill's place of business on Ellsworth Avenue. So that struck me, and I wanted to say something to you about it. Also, this is bizarre. I went to one of those lectures and this was an hour lecture on gratitude. And it was wonderful. This guy was really good, very entertaining. But he talked again about, okay, look, we can see things as a burden, or we can see things as an opportunity. It was all about, I think, positive thinking, about not getting yourself pulled into the negative all the time, which I do. I'm very good at. And instead reminding yourself of all the things you have to be grateful for. And this guy, while he's doing this lecture, starts talking about Mr. Rogers. And he talks about the documentary. And he asked this group of about 40 people, have any of you seen the Mr. Rogers documentary? And I was stunned at how many hands went up. And one guy, relatively young guy, I'd say he looked to be in his 30s, said, I've seen it twice. I thought, wow, well, this is good. This is good. But he was holding Fred up as somebody who understood just innately that you look for the good. You look for that which you are grateful for. And I mean, it can be as simple as I'm grateful for this right now because I'm thirsty. But just be aware, right? Oh, my God. You know, I went to Caliban Books all the time. I talked to that Schulman. Is that his name? Yeah, I didn't know who he was, but I knew he was the owner. I love that bookstore. You know what I'm talking about, right? This unbelievable theft of $8 million worth of rare books and maps. And the unbelievable thing is, I mean, again, if you know Pittsburgh, so the guy who runs that rare book archive would walk out the door of the Carnegie on Forbes Avenue with perhaps a $900,000 journal written by a young George Washington in his briefcase, and wave goodbye to everybody as he, bye, see you tomorrow, walk out, literally walk around the corner to Craig Street, a block away, and walk in to Caliban Books and hand over this rare piece. And he did that over and over and over again. Unbelievable. And the most bizarre part of it is he knew the value of this stuff, and he took chump change for it. He put everything, I mean, he would have had to know, being the archivist, that they do audits and that someday there'd be an audit and lots of stuff would be found missing. I don't even understand what he is this guy brain dead? How did he get to be a rare book archivist? And then the guy from Caliban Books, this dealer in antique texts and stuff like that, he didn't think that at some point, I don't understand. When people become literally driven insane by greed. And as I said, the archivist wasn't particularly greedy. He got had by the Caliban bookstore guy, who'd pay him like, all right, here, take $5,000. Then he'd turn around and sell whatever it was for, hundreds of thousands. Jeez. I can't wait for this trial. This trial's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating. I love it. So I'll tell you, Pittsburgh, I mean, come on. Dante Tex Gill, Mr. Rogers, the great library archivist heist. I mean, the New York Times. It made the New York Times. It's big. It's big. They'll make a movie about it. Just like they make movies about Dante Tex Gill and Mr. Rogers. So we have a call. Hello, caller.
Hello.
Hi.
So 20 years ago, I used to work in the Natural History Museum.
Yes.
And when you started for any of the Carnegie places back then, I think there was more of an association between the library system of Pittsburgh and the museums, plural. So they would make all the new employees go on this tour. And one of the places we went was into that place where that guy worked. I forget his name.
Fiore.
And we met him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we met him. And he started, this was probably 96.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, whatever his name is, Kurt, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, unbelievable.
He started remarking on how all of these rare books were still on the shelves and still in circulation. And I don't remember him going through all of them, but I remember the thing he was holding in his hands as he was telling us was I believe it was a copy of Peter Pan that was inlaid with Mother of Pearl on the cover. And a couple of the pieces were missing, whatever. He was just remarking on how he couldn't believe that these things were in circulation. So it does seem, the So it's not surprising when I saw the picture on the article, because I didn't know him by name, but then to see his face there, like, part of me wasn't totally surprised. The other part that's probably not surprising is they probably do not audit this stuff. However, I don't know if you saw the article I don't know if you would have, because you stopped the Post-Gazette, but
right.
and so did I. But on the other side of the wall, the museum library is totally separate. And they have started selling all of their rare books legally.
Oh,
so
for money.
I'm wondering if what happened was, if the public library suddenly remembered that they have all of these rare books, and that is when they suddenly went looking for them to sell, because the museum is having all of these, what are they called? The people that come in and put the value
audits.
on
Well, whatever.
Well, an appraiser. They're
appraisers.
having all of their...
Their holdings
like
appraised.
For years and years and years in the Natural History Museum, all of these very valuable books sat there on the shelves.
Yeah.
You could go to them. The one that they just sold, you could not go to that. The super duper valuable ones they had locked up. But there are other things that are, in the high value, but not $6 million. They're suddenly having all of those appraised right now. And my bet is that the public library is about to was going to go through a massive sell-off of all of their stuff, and went and found that it was all missing.
Okay.
Or cut up.
Well, that's why it's
just
going to be a fascinating trial, I think.
Yeah. Right.
Hey, thank you.
This is stuff that libraries watch for anyways.
Yeah.
These people, because we had known of people who had visited the collection that had a reputation for doing the slice and run thing. And luckily, the ones that we were aware of that they had looked at were all intact. But anyways.
Pretty amazing.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Fascinating story. But it's also a sad story.
Very.
That the museum is so desperate that it's selling off of all of its books.
Indeed.
So, anyways.
Thank you.
That's the end. All right.
Thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
Glad you're back.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Chuck writes, unbelievable as it may seem, I grew up on the same street where Dante Tex Gill lived for many years. You would think he would have lived in some sort of mansion, but she lived in a humble contemporary house in Brentwood, just 4 houses up the street from my parents. She was a perfect neighbor. No loud parties, no trouble. You hardly knew she was there. I saw her a few times. She dressed as a man and looked as normal as you and me. Yeah, she considered herself a man. Beth writes, I am hearing some credible rumors that Scarlett Johansson might be coming back to the project. Beth is in the film industry, and I hope so. I think it is so stupid that only a transgendered person could play this role. It's called acting, not some Lifetime fake documentary. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. I do, because this stuff is getting insane. It's called acting. Thank you. Says, glad you're back. If you want to talk about something other than Trump, did you tell us yet what happened when your parking court appearance? Oh, yeah. Right. That was the last I slam dunk, just like I knew. What a scene that is, though. Wow. I was called up. You go right up to the judge, and I said, I thought, why? And as I was called up, I said, why didn't you think about what you were going to say? And blah, blah, blah. I said, well, look, I think it all comes down, and I did. I had the picture of the no parking sign, one of those cardboard ones. No parking from this date to this date, this time to that time. I said, look, I read this as no parking from, so I gave him my case, and he looked at it and said, that's how I read it too. And he said, yeah, fine, not guilty. Bang. That's how long it took. I waited 7 months. And I really, and then I said, okay, so did I get my money back? He said, we'll send it to you. I finally got the check. I did get the check. And I said, what about the price of the tow? You towed my car. It was $145. You said that I can't do for you, but I will write you this thing, and then you can take that to the tow pound. So I still had to run over to the tow pound. I got that money. So I am whole now. But again, you have to be able to take a day off work to go do that. And a lot of people can't. And a lot of people can't pay those fines. And they started, the first cases he heard were cases of people who were sitting in the next building over, which happens to be the jail. And the judge was talking to them over a, like a FaceTime thing. And you had guys who were in jail who had to still go to traffic court. And the judge would say, like, so how long you had, what? And the guy would say, I'm serving 3.5 years federal. And the judge would look at this and that. And I'm thinking, and they still got to be dealing with these. And some of them are in jail because they can't pay traffic court fines. Although the guy's doing 3.5 years in federal was not. It was something. It's an experience. But of course I won. I told you I was wrongly accused and found guilty and had my car removed from my possession, all by some idiot. And do you think that idiot will be, in any way, hey, idiot, no. They had my money, and they maybe made some interest on it, and, not much, but whatever. Slam dunk. Ooh, I think we're done. Okay, slam dunk. Just to get the last email in here. Lynn writes, I wanted to weigh in about what you were saying about the guy who returned and then the communists had taken his home. Why can't these Republicans see this whole Russia thing as the same way they thought about the domino theory during the Vietnam War? While Trump is playing around flirting with Putin will feel empowered to keep taking over other countries in the neighborhood one by one. First it was Crimea, then it's Ukraine, next will be the Baltics. So much is about messaging, but that's an email for another day. Lock him up. Okay, I wish I could. I would happily. Okay, nice to be back. You can now begin to watch me, sort of like the picture of Dorian Gray, go from this like placid person I am today. See how long it takes before the lines on my face become, really intense and I start sighing a lot again. I'm hoping to go at least a few months. Anyway, great to be back. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.